I've opened up something special. I'm offering a complimentary coaching session, and I invite you to wisesquirrels.com/coaching right now before it fills up. Welcome to Wise Squirrels, the podcast for late diagnosed adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Dave Delaney. Today is a bit of a milestone. It's my 50th episode of Wise Squirrels. And to celebrate, I've got a guest who I am thrilled to share with you, and I'm really excited. Joseph Goldstein has been leading insight and loving kindness meditation retreats worldwide since 1974. He's a co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. In 1989, together with several other teachers and students of Insight Meditation, Joseph helped establish the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies. Since 1967, he has studied and practiced different forms of Buddhist meditation under eminent teachers from India, Burma, and Tibet. He's the author of Mindfulness, A Practical Guide to Awakening, A Heart Full of Peace, One Dharma, The Emerging Western Buddhism, Insight Meditation, The Practice of Freedom, The Experience of Insight, and he's the co-author of Seeking the Heart of Wisdom with Jack Kornfield. In recognition and respect for Joseph, and as my thank you for him offering to be a guest on the podcast, I wanted to create something special. I've talked about meditation and mindfulness quite a bit on the podcast and have been a practitioner since 2020, with a regular practice at least. And I have found it to be incredibly helpful, not just for ADHD, but also just for my life. This is something that anybody can do. In the interview today, he does offer an idea for a little challenge for you to try. His challenge is to try 10 minutes of meditation every day for 30 days. I've created a special landing page at wisesquirrels.com/steady with instructions on how to do this exactly. And before you say, I can't meditate, I can't focus long enough, or I get distracted easily, or meditation's too woo-woo, put that all aside. I think you're going to change your mind after hearing my interview with Joseph Goldstein. I wouldn't be able to do this podcast without the support of our sponsors, members. Inflow is the #1 science-based app to help you manage your ADHD. Created by ADHD clinicians and psychologists, their dedicated support system helps you understand your neurodivergent brain, build lifelong skills, and to get things done. And what's really cool about Inflow, I've been using the app, and it's really neat because it has all these lessons in it, but it's not overwhelming. I found that some apps tend to be a little too crowded. What I like about Inflow is their app is designed really well. The user interface, the user experience is fantastic because you can navigate it quite easily. And they take you through levels and topics related to managing your ADHD. I've also participated in their body doubling sessions to get work done. What's cool about it is you log in live and you have a guide and you see other users of Inflow together, all in a room working together on mute. The body doubling really does help because just being around other people, even though it's virtual, it really does help you get more done. Now, Inflow also has a cool 3-minute quiz. And to get it, just hop over to wisesquirrels.com/inflow, and we thank them for their sponsorship. I mentioned our Substack subscribers, and if you're one of them, thank you for subscribing. Those people include our founding member, Casey, Chip, Kiernan, Todd, another Chip, Darren, David, Eric, and many more who have been joining as paying members. Now, to be a subscriber of Wise Squirrels, guess what? It's like the cost of a coffee. So I do want to thank them all for their support. Another easy way to support the show is just to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Maybe it's Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Audible, wherever. The reviews that you leave actually really matter because they help others discover the show. So thanks for that. And now let's talk to Joseph Goldstein. I've been very excited about speaking with you. First of all, I want to thank you for your dedication and perseverance with mindfulness and as a teacher. I mean, I've been just kind of giddy, and of course today, excited to speak with you, and then having some technical difficulties there with Zoom going down just moments before. Right. Like literally, I took a screenshot and I checked on, and sure enough, it was down, and it is still down. And then just as we were like almost ready, I heard a chainsaw or a lawnmower, and I'm like, "Come on, please, people!" But I am happy that we're connecting here. A couple of years ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD at 50, and so I started a podcast to share my journey because that's what I do. I've been podcasting for 20 years almost, so I was excited to kind of share my journey. So I created this podcast and this website called Wise Squirrels. Wise for the wisdom that we accrue through our lives by developing coping mechanisms, really unknowingly, to treat our ADHD and to kind of succeed however we can. And during this experience, I've learned that with undiagnosed and untreated ADHD, your life expectancy can be up to 13 years less. Right. And when I learned that, it changed this little passion project of mine into a mission of getting more people, if they feel they could have ADHD, to get diagnosed and treated. And one of the best treatment, in my humble opinion, beyond like medicinal stuff and certainly in addition maybe to medicinal and therapeutic, is mindfulness and meditation. And what better person to speak to about this than yourself? You started your practice when you were 23, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to reiterate something I mentioned to you. I don't have experience in working much with people with this, but yes, I can share my meditative understandings.
Thank you. Yes. And I meant to mention that as well. And the most common, and I'll get into some of this, the most common effects of ADHD and comorbidities associated with ADHD are all things that very much mindfulness and meditation play a major role in treating and helping. So you probably unknowingly have treated a lot of people without, and so yes, we'll definitely preface it with that for sure. So you started your mindfulness practice at 23, and I was curious what led you to that point. Like, what led you there?
Right. So when I finished college, I went into the Peace Corps in Thailand, and that's where I first connected with Buddha and the Buddhist teachings, but was not doing no intensive practice at all. It was the beginning introduction. And then right at the end of my Peace Corps stay, somebody was reading from a Tibetan text. It was just a friend and I, and my mind, for some reason, just got quite concentrated, and there was a real kind of opening of some kind just from listening. But I didn't have much meditative experience at that point. But it was so really a profound experience. I realized I needed a teacher, because I didn't know what to do with it. So this was right at the end of my Peace Corps time. Went back home and then decided to go back to Asia to find a teacher. And I stopped on the way. I stopped in India. I thought I'd go back to Thailand, but I stopped in India. Traveled around a bit looking for different teachers, and ended up in Bodh Gaya, the place of the Buddhist enlightenment, which is where I met my first teacher. And he said something from the very beginning, which completely captured me. He says, if you want to understand your mind, sit down and observe it. And I just loved it because such common sense. How else can we understand our minds except by observing it? So there was at that point, there was no ritual, there was no ceremony, there was nothing to join. he just taught the basic mindfulness practice, Vipassana. And it was love at first sight. It was exactly what I was looking for.
So almost 58 years of practicing and teaching for 51 years.
Yeah, yeah.
It's incredible. What did your parents think about these travels? I mean,
Right.
pretty.
Well, my father died when I was quite young, when I was 12.
Oh.
But my mother, she had a very adventuresome spirit. And so she was traveling around, even as I was growing up. We lived in a really small town, so there was nothing there for her after my father died. So she would go on these long freighter trips around the world. And I would stay with my aunt and uncle. And so she was in India before I was.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So she was very supportive, even though my other relatives were not so supportive. I would get letters from my uncle or aunt, "You're killing your mother. Come home." But my mother was not like that at all. In fact, she visited me in India, and she stayed at where I was saying, the Burmese Vihar. So very primitive. But she was like that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What was her background like? Was she from the States, or did she what was her journey?
Say the last thing.
What was her journey like? Was she just born and raised in the States and decided to travel, and after your father passed away?
I think when she started traveling, it was not like a spiritual journey.
Yeah.
She just wanted to get out of the small town and meet people. She was relatively young when my father died. She had 2 kids, but she had that spirit. She loved that kind of traveling and exploring. And
I love that. I mean, that's what ended up, I mentioned before, I'm from Toronto originally and moved to Nashville in 2007, but I moved and raised both our kids here, but moved to Nashville from Toronto by way of Ireland, which is where I met my wife, backpacking and traveling. And she's from Tennessee. So yeah, small world. You never, I love the quote from St. Augustine, who said something like, "The world is a book, and those who haven't traveled turn only one page," I think is the line, which, yeah. And I mean, you're just a shining example of the power of travel. Because had you not left,
no, absolutely. I'd probably be a lawyer.
yeah. One of the things that I really appreciate about your guided meditations, through all the different apps that you appear in, and I'm a big Sam Harris fan. I really enjoy his work, and I've really enjoyed your deep conversation with Dan Harris as well recently, and I get a lot out of just listening and learning from you. But one thing that you do, for a lot of people who haven't practiced mindfulness or meditation, or they've tried and they get kind of overwhelmed. And some of the guides that I've gone through in different apps or on YouTube or whatever, the teachers were like, they're okay. Or they're, and some even in person. I've done a little bit of meditation in person at a local Buddhist temple here in Nashville. But what I love about your approach is you bring this warmth and this charming wit about you. You laugh, you crack jokes when you least suspect it. But I love that warmth because it makes the practice so much more inviting and embracing. Yeah. Tell me about that. How did you tap in? Was this something you realized along the way? Did you take it much more seriously in your youth? And then tell me about that.
There are two things. One, I grew up in the Catskill Mountains. I know you're familiar. It was a Jewish resort area near New York. It was called the Borscht Belt.
Yeah.
And, my family had it was like a summer resort.
Yeah.
Where we would have entertainment on Saturday nights. Yeah. So all these Jewish comedians every week, and a lot of them were terrible, but some were good. But I think it tapped in, to the whole element of Jewish humor.
Yeah.
Which is just part. So that's just part of me.
Yeah.
Okay. That being said, though, when I first started teaching, I was much more serious.
Mm.
In fact, I recently had an online 80th birthday party.
Happy birthday. Happy belated. That's you're 81 next month, right? Is
Yeah,
that right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So the person who's organizing it found this old film video of me teaching at Naropa Institute with Ram Dass and Trungpa Rinpoche. That was in '74. It was like a
Yeah.
Buddhist Woodstock. It was a big event.
Yeah. That's amazing.
But when I saw that video, I was teaching eating meditation. I was really serious. I mean, first I was very young,
Yeah.
and so my whole persona was very different in teaching over the years. And this ties into my new favorite definition of enlightenment,
Mm.
which is lightening up. you know, so a lot of it's just lightening up, not taking ourselves so seriously
Yeah.
until we see through the illusion of self altogether.
Yeah.
And I can see over the many years of my teaching, I've definitely lightened up a lot over the years
Yeah.
from those beginning years. And a lot of it is just getting more comfortable teaching, Yeah, but there's definitely a trajectory towards more relaxation, more humor, connecting in that way.
Yeah.
Which
And I think
I enjoy it a lot more.
yeah. And I think it does yeah, I think it does make the experience better. And yeah, I've mentioned this on the show before, but I saw an interview with Dr. Gupta with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it was a video of some segment from something, and they were meditating together, and Dr. Gupta had written about this, of how like nervous he was. And then I think he was his eyes were closed and he was following along, and then it got awkwardly quiet, and the Dalai Lama, and he opened his eyes and the Dalai Lama was laughing. He was giggling, and he's like, what's happening? Like, am I doing something wrong? And he's like, no, I was just thinking of something and I couldn't. And he was like, wait. You can't,
Right.
you can't focus. So, but I always loved that example.
Well,
really stood out to me as bringing a humor to it, and also understanding that like, you can't completely stop your thoughts. That's like such an important point. I heard something recently where or it might've been recent, might've been older, I don't remember, but you talked about how you called thoughts, it might've been something recent, you called thoughts little dictators of the mind.
Right. Yeah.
So I know that like to practice, to close in a sort of traditional sense, and in a first time novice sense of closing your eyes, focusing on, let's say, your breath, you start to, obviously your mind starts thinking of things you have to do and so on. One thing I've learned, I think it was from Sam Harris's guidance through his app, of allowing that thought to play out like a short film. And I found that really works well. And so like, if I think I have to walk the dog later, I'll imagine myself walking Peggy, doing exactly like taking her out, putting her on the leash, picking up her poop, bringing her home. And then like seconds later, that thought has played out like a short film and it's done. And now I can return to the breath. And that is something that I've been sharing with friends and something that I have found really helpful. However, I heard you talk about the idea of there's that moment when you come out of that thought, right, but you start to beat yourself up about thinking about that thought in this judgmental way. And I know you're a big believer in, obviously, in non-judgmental
right,
awareness. So are there strategies or ways to deal with that?
Yeah. So it's whether or not one plays the thought out, as you said, or one doesn't do that and the thought is there for as long as it's there.
Yeah.
And comes out, you come out by itself, at a certain point.
Yeah.
But I encourage people to pay attention to that moment when they've gone from being lost, however long, to waking up from being lost. Because right in that transition moment, there's tremendous insight that can happen in that moment, because in that moment we see kind of the quality of delusion for all the time we're lost.
Mhm.
It's like we're lost in a movie. We're not aware even that we're thinking. We're just
Right.
lost in the story.
Yeah.
But then in the moment of coming out from the thought, we've gone from really delusion to awareness, to wakefulness. And it's very apparent, the difference in that moment, because we've just gone from lost to awake. And so what I suggest for people, especially when they notice that their tendency is to judge the fact that they've been lost,
Mm.
to change that and to delight in the fact of being awake.
That you're
So
back.
that you're back, and not only back, but with insight into the nature of wakefulness or awareness, contrasted to the experience of being lost.
Mm.
It's all very apparent that you've just gone in that moment from one to the other.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to see, oh, this was like being asleep. This is awake. And to really, in a way, not investigate with thought, but just paying attention to the quality of wakefulness.
Yeah.
Because that reinforces one's understanding of the nature of awareness. So it's not just some mysterious thing that sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't happen.
Yeah.
We're really connecting with what it is in that moment. And so I usually close that little wrap. For as many times as we get lost, that many times do we awaken, right?
Yeah.
And so why not delight in the wakefulness rather than judge the being lost?
Yeah. I love that. So yeah, you're celebrating in a sense. Yeah. The fact that well, first of all, the fact that you're even sitting and attempting to meditate in the first place. And like, let's say it's the very first time you do it, and the very first time you sit and you focus on your breath and your eyes are closed, let's say, and you have some thought, and this is the point that I talk to friends and even my daughter sometimes about, like, their frustration with, like, I can't do it. I can't. Right. And
hey, this is Dr. George Sachs, co-founder of Inflow, a proud sponsor of Wise Squirrels. If you have ADHD, you know how tough it can be to stay on top of, well, mostly everything. That's why we created Inflow, an app designed by expert clinicians and people with ADHD to help you understand your brain, build habits that actually stick, and feel less alone in the process. Get the support you need with Inflow. Head to wisesquirrels.com/inflow to check it out.
And to your point, it's the fact that you've realized. And so you have a choice right then.
Yeah.
Give up, this doesn't work, or return to the breath.
Yeah. And to keep delighting in the moments of awakening.
Yes.
Which will happen many times. It will happen as many times as you get lost.
Yeah.
So one other kind of thing which I generally highlight with all this, especially for beginners, as really being the first insight of insight meditation, is seeing how often the mind gets lost. Because most people don't know that about their minds. So instead of treating it, oh my God, I can't do this, it's like, oh, I'm seeing what my mind is doing.
Yeah.
So that's an important insight. So people they should feel encouraged by the fact that they're seeing how often the mind wanders.
Yes.
That's actually an insight. And so that could give a little encouragement.
Yeah.
Because for everybody, the mind is going to want to,
Yeah.
But,
oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just going to say, if you go up to somebody in the street who's never meditated and you ask them, does your mind wander? They probably, no, my mind doesn't wander. They have no idea. They have no idea what their minds are doing.
Right.
So for people beginning practice who begin to see this, that's really important. That should be reinforced.
And I've heard people talk about, like, reference, like the example of, like, driving from point A to point B for like however long, and either missing your exit as you're driving,
No,
right?
exactly.
Or even asking someone who's done a long drive, how was your drive?
Right.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah.
What happened during those 2 hours?
Right.
I don't know.
Non-stop thinking.
Yeah. And yeah, so it is, this idea of waking up in that sense.
Yeah.
The thing with ADHD, there's like a bunch of fun stuff, air quotes fun, that come along with ADHD, which really is, earlier on. And again, I always preface it also that I'm not a doctor, nor do I play one on the internet. So I don't pretend to be. And in the last couple of years, I've learned a ton by speaking to folks and my own treatment. But that obviously there's the stereotypical hyperactive boy, the Bart Simpson, but there's also inattentive type, which is more someone getting lost in thought, daydreaming, that kind of thing, especially as children. And then even this combined presentation of ADHD, where it's sort of a bit of both in a sense. But the things that come along with ADHD, things like time blindness. So like time management becomes a real challenge, and self-doubt is a big one as well. That they say that an average 10-year-old with ADHD has heard 20,000 plus negative things from parents, school teachers, etc., until by the time they've reached 10. And so that's going to give you some trauma and give you kind of a rough upbringing, even if you're in a loving home. But in addition to this, because it's highly heritable, there's a good likeliness that one or both of your parents also have ADHD, which can account for all sorts of things like addictions, and because that's also part of this. And I've said a lot of stuff there, but maybe focusing on like that essence of time, or that idea of time management, and how time goes so quickly and we lose track of time. And again, as we said at the beginning, you're not an ADHD expert or anything, but I think mindfulness and meditation certainly can help with time management, let's say. Any thoughts?
Well, I don't know how relevant this will be, but I'll just share my own strategy for time management.
Yeah.
So I always have a million things going on that I have to do, and different projects and talks and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And I see my mind can do two things with that. Sometimes it can just feel a little overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, I have so much to do, and how am I going to get all this done? And kind of spin like that.
Yeah.
But what I found helpful, and again, I don't know how applicable this will be or not.
Sure.
But what has really helped me a lot is basically laying out a timeline in my mind, but it could be written down, for when things need to be done.
Mm.
Because it's very rare that everything needs to be done at the same time. It's like, so if I have in my mind the timeline of when things need to be done and how much time I'll need to do it, yes, then I know, I have to begin working on this tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe, no, I can begin work on this next week, and that just kind of orders everything. So instead of it being a big jumble,
mm-hmm,
trying to figure out in that big mix,
yeah,
oh, well, what do I do? Do I work on this or work on that? It's really laid out pretty systematically, and it creates a lot more space. I'm not overloading myself,
yeah,
in any one moment or one day, because I've seen, oh no, I'll take care of this in 3 days. So again, I don't know whether that is something that's feasible for people.
Yeah. I think having whether they're your own or whether they're from someone else, often from someone else helps, but having that deadline, having those dates, those hard dates and times that you need to have deliverables done.
Right.
So, like, writing, like when I wrote my first book, it was very much that I had an advance from my publisher.
Right,
like
right,
I had
right.
a legal contract to deliver the chapters on time. And so, and I know you've written multiple excellent books, by the way. So yeah. And as far as like self-doubt goes, because that overwhelm piece of it, and certainly the trauma from negative, things over your youth, especially, can really be can leave you with a crushing self-doubt and getting stuck a lot of the time, which fits into that overwhelm. I believe is it called, I'm going to try to do this. Karuna? Is that like a negative self-talk?
No, Karuna is compassion.
Oh, maybe that's what I was thinking about when I jotted it down, was the idea of being more self-compassionate for yourself in order to treat that self-doubt. I think that's where I was going with it.
Yeah.
I was kind of. What are your thoughts on self-doubt and that kind of thing?
So I'll tell the story just from my own experience, that I don't know if it fits exactly into ADHD, but it's related to what you just asked.
Mm.
So this goes back many years, I don't know, 15, 20, 25 years. I was on a self-retreat, a 2-month self-retreat. And that was a time when I was having a lot of back trouble, but nothing too bad, but it was... So in the middle of the retreat, my back was bothering me. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll just go for a chiropractic adjustment, which I had done many times.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that, but I had already been sitting for about a month. So right in the middle of this, I go, it was disaster.
Mm.
I went, and it was just it was a kind of adjustment I had a million times, but I don't know, either because my energy system was so open, and so any kind of forceful, my body went into shock.
Oh man.
And it was incredible. It's like it froze. It was terrible. It was really terrible.
Mm.
So then I go back to where the retreat, but everything had changed. I was just dealing with this. And the thought that kept coming in my mind, and this is where it could be related to the self-doubt.
Mm.
The thought that kept coming to my mind was, how could I have been so stupid to leave the retreat and go get a chiropractic adjustment? How stupid. Because I was really suffering.
Yeah.
The thing is that how stupid was so seductive. I totally believed it. Because it was so stupid. And anyway, it was completely seductive. So when that thought, even just those few words came up in my mind, I was gone. Like half an hour later, I'd still be ruminating about what a stupid thing to do, and da 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 da. So I was struggling with this for quite a while. And then at a certain point, I realized I absolutely cannot give that thought any airtime. Not even the first 3 words. They were just too seductive.
Yes.
I immediately believed them, and that would carry me off. So I developed something, and I'm not sure this is politically correct, but I developed something which I called cowboy dharma.
Yeah.
So whenever I saw just those few words of that thought, like I take out my 6-shooter, knock it out of the sky, knock it out of the mind.
I love that.
And it was miraculous for a variety of reasons. One is that I kept an eye out for the arising of that particular thought pattern.
Hmm.
Because I recognized, okay, this is the thought pattern that's catching me again and again. Right. So first I recognized whenever the thought would start, oh,
Yeah.
how stupid. And then having this little gesture of cowboy Dharma brought some humor into it,
Yeah.
which also is very helpful.
Yeah.
So I was taking effective action, but not with aversion, not with judgment. It became like a game almost.
Yeah.
So I just would not let that thought, I didn't give it any airtime. And it was amazing. The whole situation changed the condition of my body was the same.
Mm.
But instead of all that self-judgment and being lost for long periods of time in it, that was all gone.
Are you still doing that today? You stub your toe?
No, most things didn't have that.
It was that, yeah.
It was the experience was so intense
Hmm.
that's why that thought had such power. Because what did I do? I was happily on a retreat and I just messed everything up. How stupid. So this is kind of an interesting take on mindfulness. And again, whether this is generally applicable for ADHD or not, I don't know. But most of the language of mindfulness is the mindfulness of basically, yes, allowing, accepting, being with.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't realize that there's an equally important value in a wise no. That if there are unskillful patterns in the mind that cause suffering, it's not that we just want to drown in them or wallow in them or feed them.
Yeah.
No, and the Buddha in the text, he used very strong language to cut through unwholesome patterns.
Hmm.
The key is, and this is could be challenging, so whether it's cowboy dharma or sometimes I would just use the phrase, enough.
Yeah.
I would do that a lot with sensual desire.
Mm-hmm.
This goes back in my youth.
Yeah.
Where there was a lot of sexual desire.
Sure.
I have all these fantasies. And those were enjoyable as opposed to not enjoyable.
Yeah.
But it was the same seduction. And so at a certain point, I realized these are not going anyplace.
Hmm.
And so I came up with a few ways of addressing that, and it might apply.
Yeah.
On the more negative side to the self-doubt. One phrase I used when I would see these fantasies arise again and again and again. I mean, it was not just once or twice. I would say, dead end.
Hmm.
This is not going anyplace. I'll get to the end of whatever this thought pattern is, and then I'm right back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so putting dead end at the front of it rather than at the end of it,
Huh.
it reminded me, no, this is not going anyplace. Okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would use enough.
Yeah.
But it's like the sword of Manjushri, the sword of wisdom.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to learn how to play with both the accepting, allowing side,
mm-hmm.
and also, I don't know what we could say, the sword of wisdom side.
Yeah.
Where we're not just indulging, or being carried away. Sometimes it's like a no. And, I'm not a parent, but I'm sure you've experienced it. I mean, if you raised kids without ever saying no, they'd be monsters.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so no is not a bad word.
Right.
But when it's used lovingly, that's the key. Because people, if they're not doing it in that way, it could just exacerbate the problem.
And in a sense, when you're saying no to your child in a loving way, as you're saying, it's also important getting back to that self-compassion piece, right? Of like, if you're saying no to yourself, or enough, then that's also practicing love for yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
To prevent you from going down that rabbit hole of self-doubt.
One indication of whether it's loving or not is watching the tone of voice in the mind of the words you're using. So it could be enough, or it could be, enough. Just the tone of voice will change the quality of mind.
Yeah.
So one wants to pay attention to that, because if we're doing this with aversion, that is just locking the problem in.
Mm-hmm.
Not helpful. But used wisely, it can really save us a lot of suffering. Because we're letting go of the patterns that cause suffering quicker.
Yeah.
And so this is, I could go on and on and on.
No, go on. Yeah.
Something that's really helpful for people to remember, and this probably is more applicable for people who have a little bit of practice experience. When they're relating to these thought patterns, whether it's self-doubt or self-judgment or whatever, just the remembrance that it is just a thought. That's all it is. It's not, because people identify with the thought, they tend to build a whole sense of self around that thought.
Yes.
And that's where the problem is. Instead of seeing, this is a conditioned thought pattern and not so hard to see where it comes from, but it is just a thought.
Yeah.
So, that, and what I'm about to say now is probably for more experienced meditators. One of the things that I have found super interesting, when there's some degree of mindfulness there, and there are a lot of thoughts happening, to actually ask the question, what is a thought? Not what is the thought saying, but what is the thought as a phenomenon? And so if there are a lot of thoughts happening, that's an opportunity to do that. So we're watching these thoughts. Well, what exactly is a thought? And when you look, again, it's not the content. It's the nature of thought. You see, it's a little more than nothing. The nature of thought, it's so ephemeral, and there's almost nothing there. It's a little energy blip.
Yeah.
It's the content that solidifies the experience, not the fact that the thought is arising. So when people can get some insight into the nature of thought, then they don't take their thoughts so seriously. They say it's just it's like a sound. Sound arises and passes. We don't generally react.
Yeah.
A thought is like that.
Yeah.
So there's a whole range of ways of relating to these thought patterns.
No, I love that. And I have to ask, with the Dharma Cowboy, are we talking like John Wayne or Clint Eastwood? Who's popping in your head when you're
Annie Oakley?
Nice. Good choice. Yes.
Really, whatever. Each person will have their own kind of image of it.
Yeah.
Or it could be like an amusement park.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
the
That's
important
great.
thing is the humor,
Yes.
which allows for not taking the content so seriously.
Mm.
Not
Because you realize it's a thought.
exactly.
That's all it is.
So this is tremendously freeing and of course it takes practice,
Yeah.
because as I expressed in that experience, for deep patterns, they can be very seductive. The content can be super seductive, where we just believe it. So this could be a gradual practice for people,
Mm-hmm.
in the best way they can, to just begin exploring this. Oh, just a thought.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, it ties back to like anxiety and depression in a sense, because like anxiety and depression are really the most common comorbidities from ADHD. And a lot of the ADHD doctors and experts would say that like you need to, if you are treating anxiety, let's say, it doesn't mean that like anyone with anxiety has ADHD or anything,
Right.
but it's commonly, they're common bedfellows. And if you have ADHD and you're not treating the ADHD, but you're treating the anxiety or the depression or both, the core issue is the ADHD. And so if you're not treating that,
Right.
there's a chance that you're going to slip back to that way.
Right.
And so,
Right.
addressing that, but I think, and certainly self-doubt. Any thoughts around addiction, depression, anxiety? Because addiction is another one of these things that comes along with, because we lack dopamine, we're trying to find dopamine in ways, good or bad sometimes. And addiction is often the bad way, or excessive eating and things, talking too much, clearly. But then also, there's positive things, right? Like for me to stand on stages, which is a lot of what I do, is presentations and keynotes and workshops. And I love networking and being with people. I love people. I'm an extrovert. I drive my wife crazy. I love that. And I know now that I receive so much dopamine from those experiences that I'm just naturally in my happy place.
Right.
But of course you can get that dopamine in negative ways, drinking, drugs, smoking,
Right.
etc. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah. I have thoughts about almost anything. Whether they're useful or not, that's another question. I'm rarely at a loss for. So I'm assuming that what I'm about to say is related to dopamine, but I don't know.
I'm not a doctor either, so I'll play along.
But what brings that sense of, you could say, enjoyment or fulfillment or contentment, with regard to the practice, is the quality of concentration. And obviously for people with ADHD, concentration may be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think there are ways to develop it gradually. And once the mind begins to be able to access some level of concentration, it doesn't have to be super whatever, but some level of it, it's like everything changes, because the body feels comfortable, the mind feels more restful. It's an enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
And so I had an interesting experience with this when I first started meditating, when I went to India. And when I started, I had zero concentration. I studied philosophy in school. My mind loved to think. And so I'd sit and meditate and I'd think for the hour and I'd enjoy it. And then the hour went quickly. But I realized I wasn't getting any place. I was just getting lost in thought all the time. So for me, and different people will find different ways, I did a 6-week intensive retreat doing the loving kindness meditation. And this may be a good practice for people, because as we're doing the different phrases, there's a certain activity to engage the mind, which might be easier than just the breath.
Yeah.
But people would have to experiment with that.
Yeah.
But what I saw after doing some time of the metta, it was the first time that my mind actually became somewhat concentrated. And I remember the thought I had, oh, this is why people like to meditate. So instead of it being the chore or thinking, oh, this will be good for me, it was through the concentration. Oh, yeah, this feels good, which then reinforces, of course, the inspiration to keep doing it.
Yeah.
So then the question would be for different people, given ADHD, what would be some of the more skillful ways of beginning the training in concentration? And so there are a few. Is there a time limit for you?
I'm good. I mean, you tell me whenever. And
No,
I'm
fine.
I'm fine.
How long you want this to go?
No, yeah, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one thing that I found really helpful in developing concentration is changing the vocabulary a little bit. Because very often it'll be taught in the, I'll make an effort to concentrate. And somehow that's the frame.
Yeah.
I found that's not that helpful. I found what's more helpful was, instead of framing it in terms of effort, just using the frame of intentionality. So I'll give you an example. So when I was doing the metta and the metta phrases, I would realize that, may you be happy, may you be sad, whatever the phrases are. But I would notice that even within one phrase, I would start it, and then halfway through my mind would wander.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, when I saw that so clearly, I just started at the beginning of each phrase, which is a short phrase. I just reminded myself of the intention to stay steady for that one phrase. That's all. So, may you be at ease. Right? And then before the next phrase, where the intention was to stay steady for the duration of that short phrase. That's what builds concentration. People often mistakenly think, okay, I'm going to sit and I'm going to be concentrated for half an hour. That's way too much. But we can be steady for something very short, a short duration. But it has to be, we have to renew our intention each time. And what that does, I don't know if this is the right, we're creating new neural pathways for that steadiness. And so we're getting familiar with what steadiness means. But it has to be for a very short duration. And that could be done with the breath as well. Instead of holding on to the breath for dear life, you sit down, and before each in-breath, we call that intention to, steady for the in-breath, steady for the out-breath. And even if one did that for 5 minutes, the effect would be noticeable.
Yeah.
So that's one way.
Yeah.
Another way is understanding that steadiness of mind can be developed either through a narrowing of the attention onto the breath or the metta phrases, but we can also develop steadiness of mind with a more open awareness. So we're not trying to fix the mind on any one object, but we're staying steady in the awareness of whatever's arising in the mind. So it's like the image I use. So you stood by the side of a highway and you wanted to see all the cars go by. Mostly people would be doing this. Oh, turn to the left, turn to the right. Of course, get a headache.
Yeah.
The great enlightenment moment is when you realize if you just stay with your eyes open and still, you'll see every car that passes your field of vision. Cars are doing the work. You don't have to do the work.
Yeah.
You're just there and the eyes are open. So there's something analogous. For example, if one started with the breath, instead of narrowing the intention or zeroing in on the breath, one could be aware of the whole body sitting and feeling the breath within that larger context. But that larger context allows for being aware of anything else that may arise within the frame of the whole body, like different sensations, or even thoughts arising within that larger frame.
Yeah.
So instead of all these different objects jerking us around, like looking left, looking right, no, we're stable in the awareness of the whole body sitting, and then noticing whatever it is that arises. Could be a breath, could be a sensation, could be a sound. And the noting could be very helpful there, because whatever arises, in, out, hearing, pressure. So the mind is actually becoming steady, but unchanging objects. The mind's very open rather than narrowly focused. So that might be helpful for people whose minds tend to go to a lot of different things. And instead of trying to force it onto a single object, one's just giving the mind a bigger frame and allowing whatever arises to arise, but with mindfulness, with connection for each thing.
That's amazing. So what you're saying is like as like imagining being on that highway, and rather than watching the cars go back and forth, sitting straight, pardon me, and just looking straight, and you're able to see every car going by.
Yes, exactly.
But then also I would imagine that in doing that, you might also start to notice a bird in the distance or a mountain.
Yeah.
That's in the that you maybe wouldn't notice because you're just looking at the cars.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
if you're looking straight, it's
you'll
almost
see everything. You'll see everything that arises within that space.
There's something to be said. It's like you're seeing more with stillness in a sense.
Yes.
Right? Like
yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah.
And again, for people maybe who are just more in the beginning stages of this, I would start very short, 10 minutes. So it doesn't get overwhelming. And if it can be framed in some of these ways, hopefully it could inspire some interest. Oh, that's interesting. Let me see.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important, so it doesn't become too much or overwhelming.
Yeah.
But as people get a little more familiar with it, then of course they can extend the time.
Yeah, I love love and kindness, as you mentioned, metta, and it's definitely a practice I do, and I love to do it. One thing that I struggle with sometimes doing it is, and for those like if not familiar, and you can correct me where I'm wrong, but my understanding, at least the way I understand it, is at first you're focusing on first on someone close to you that and wishing them well, and then the second part is imagining someone in your life who you don't really know well, or stranger, someone I always think of this guy at the grocery store. And then the third is yourself. That's my understanding. Is that right? I've heard both. Like, I don't know.
So there are two different frames here.
Okay.
One is how it's traditionally taught.
Okay. Yeah.
One is how Western teachers have modified it. So traditionally, we start with oneself, but very briefly. And it's almost by way of, just as I want to be happy, so may you be happy. Just as I want to be safe, it's like that. So we're basically using ourselves as a witness or connecting our feeling for the other based on what we feel for ourselves.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is the traditional way, but they don't really emphasize spending a lot of time with that. So that could be like a few minutes, or then going to a benefactor or friend, and then a neutral person, then a difficult person.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, however, in the West, because there is so much self-judgment and self-hatred and all of that, a lot of Western teachers give more emphasis to sending metta towards oneself. And generally, people who teach like that generally will start with that and then move on.
The third person you said, someone difficult.
Right.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Is that like you're wishing you're not enemy, but let's hope we don't have enemies, but wishing, somebody, politician, let's say, although
in the text, they do use the word enemy. We soften it a little bit by saying difficult person. Yeah, it's somebody who you don't have good feelings about.
Yeah.
Have been really problematic in your life or whatever. But here's where that, just as I want to be happy, so may you be happy. And one could do a little psychological, there's a potential downside to this, but it could be helpful.
Yeah.
What I'm about to say, I'm going to be exaggerating a little bit, but may you be free of all those obnoxious qualities that are so problematic.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
I mean, the wish, it could be a genuine wish.
Yeah.
If there's the understanding, those are really causing that person suffering.
Yeah.
But it could also be not so skillful. It's like, that's not really metta. It's just stop bugging me.
But it's interesting because I've never heard the version that, as you're saying, of that last person being someone, your enemy, so to speak. And I think there's power in that too, just because, if you can bring yourself to wish someone you don't like well, and also if you're, correct me where I'm wrong, but like if you're, let's say you're doing this practice and then let's say you're going to end the practice on this person because that's the order, then it's almost more positive in a sense, because you go about your day. The last part of it that you can recall is giving your...
except one thing I left out was generally in the sequence, one would end with, so it goes, begin with self and benefactor, friend, new person, difficult. But generally then we end with sending metta to all beings.
Okay.
So that's where it would end up rather than, but to show I had a very interesting experience of teaching metta. So I was teaching a course just outside New York right after 9/11. So you can imagine it was very intense. And we started doing the metta practice. And there were a lot of New Yorkers at the retreat. And basically the message was, there's no way I can send metta to these guys who flew into the towers. I mean, it was just incomprehensible to them that they could possibly do that. And it really made me think, because I could totally understand that on one hand. And on the other hand, the Buddha talked of these as being universal and boundless, including all. So I was trying to reconcile that. And I realized there was a way, but depending on the circumstance, we need to adjust the phrases. So to wish for them to be happy, that's not going to fly.
Yeah.
But one could wish, may you be free of hatred. May you be free of fear. Whatever. And is there anybody that we would exclude from that wish?
Yeah.
No. Even people who do horrible things, we're wishing them to be free of the causes of them doing horrible things.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we need to adjust the words so that they make sense to us.
I was going to say, almost like I think of, like, let's say, like a killer who's still out, like they haven't been captured yet, but it's in a sense, it's almost selfish, well, I don't know, but in a sense that, like, if you wish them these good thoughts and that they become healthy, in theory, they won't murder somebody else, because they'll, you know what I mean? Like, so in a sense, for humanity, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think, and then this may take a little maturity, but at a certain point, it is also genuinely wishing it for them. So it's not just, this will be good for everybody else.
Yeah, sure.
But especially in situations like that, it takes some nuance of how we're doing it and the phrases we're using. There are different ways of practicing metta. And again, I don't know whether this would, unpacking them a little bit, whether people with ADHD would find one or another of these ways more effective. So, for example, there are basically, in the metta practice, there are three things generally going on. There's the person who's sending it to. There are the phrases that we use. And there's the feeling of metta that arises of goodwill. For different people, one or another of those three may be easier to stay steady on. So, for example, for some people, maybe holding the image of the person just comes easily.
Yeah.
They can imagine the person. So then that could be their main object. And then the phrases could just be dropped in, to reinforce the feeling.
Yeah.
But the main part, rather than the phrases, would be the image. Other people have a hard time keeping an image steady in the mind. So for them, the repetition of the phrases is really a good way. It's like a mantra of loving kindness. And so we're just repeating the phrase, and so that's easier. For some people, the feeling of metta comes quite naturally, that they hardly need much. So I had this experience. For me, I'm a great dog lover. I just have to think of a dog. My heart,
yeah,
they amuse me. I just feel all of this kind of loving energy. So it doesn't take much at all. If I'm doing it that way, I'll just call some image of a dog I know come to mind. Yeah. And then once that feeling is established, I can feel my heart opening. Then what I sometimes do is just rest in the feeling and let different beings walk through the field.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So quite spontaneously, not in any plan.
Yeah.
What I think of is just walking through this field of metta, first generated by the dog.
That's really interesting, because that is one of my challenges, is like, even in that first or maybe second step, but that focus of the first person you're really focusing on, which is someone you love, someone close to you, 9 times out of 10, I imagine my wife, but then I think, well, what about my son? He's off at college right now. I should think about my son. So I switched to my son, and then I think of my daughter. She's in high school and her senior. So like, then I start flipping from person to person, and I'm like,
right.
Like, oh,
Right. You can just stay in the field and let them walk through.
yeah. So I'm not doing it wrong.
No.
You know what I mean, though? Because I always think that I'm doing it wrong, because I'm like, oh no, focus on I think about the guy at the grocery store, but then there was that like great server at the restaurant the other day. I need to think about her.
Well,
I'm always doing it for the grocery store. He's got enough.
I think that if you're doing the metta in a general way, just for cultivating the feeling, then whatever works. It doesn't matter. If you're doing it really as a way of strengthening concentration, then I think what you just described wouldn't be that helpful.
Yeah.
Like, it would be better to stay focused on one person for a while, and so the samadhi can deepen. But another way of the samadhi deepening could also happen, as I just said, not so much with the words as with the image, or I'm just looking out my window there. 3, 4, there's a whole of big birds. I have a big
beautiful
open windows.
Yeah.
They're beautiful.
Beautiful.
There could also be the steadiness for concentration purposes of just resting in the feeling. If somehow the feeling comes strongly of just goodwill and connectedness and openness, so that could be the main object of the concentration, even as the objects change.
Yeah.
So it depends. It depends, again, whether you're doing the metta as a concentration practice or just a kind of general, development of that feeling. Yeah.
And I love it. I mean, I think it's a great point about, using it in that sense of especially for wise squirrels, to focus on, to help them with focusing on someone, and also getting back to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is like about being non-judgmental. When you do think of that second person, third person, it's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So one thing also that I found helpful in metta practice is also giving emphasis or dropping into the meaning of the words, because it can be pretty easy for the phrases to become mechanical. Where we're repeating the phrases and there's some connection with them, but they're not necessarily generating the feeling. So I found that when I'm doing different phrases, if I really, I don't know the right word, dropping into or understanding actually the meaning of what I'm wishing, or it's almost like imagining people experiencing what I'm wishing.
Yeah.
So if I'm saying, may you be happy or may you be peaceful, it's almost like embodying that in myself as I'm saying it.
Yes.
So there's an actual connection between the words and the feeling.
And I'm being mindful of the time, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. You've already been very gracious, and I appreciate that. Thanks. When I spoke to Diana Winston, I mentioned something that I've I tend to try to do, and I was just curious. I'm curious what your take is, which is ultimately like but when I'm meditating by myself, I try to smile.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, like not with a teacher, because that would be weird. Like if everybody's smiling at them, or perhaps. But for me personally, like I try to smile, and it came from like many years ago. I had this telephone sales type job, which was terrible, and I hated it. And I was miserable. And one of my colleagues said, hey, try smiling when you're on the phone. And so I was like, all right, whatever, what the hell, and I'll just do it. And sure enough, it actually did work well. And so I'm always trying to be mindful of smiling. What are your thoughts on smiling actually during practice?
Well, it depends on how big a smile. So there is one teacher. Do you know Lee Bresington?
No.
So he teaches a particular form of concentration practice, jhana practice. And the way he learned it was to sit with a slight smile on the face. So it's not a big grin.
Yeah.
And there is something physiological that happens with that. So
yeah, I
think it's fine. One of my favorite go-to mantras for meditation is whatever works.
Yeah.
And so with things like this, it's like to try it, and see, does it bring about more settledness or more ease or whatever?
Yeah.
And you just experiment and see, well, it does, it doesn't.
Yeah. And that's a great point. Well, this has been incredible. Was there anything I didn't ask you that you thought, I would love to, or about ADHD or anything like that? Or someone who is, I started my practice. I mean, I dabbled for many years, but never really seriously. And in 2020, when the world was imploding, and my dad was on his latter stages of dementia and Alzheimer's, I started taking my health more seriously. And I decided, several different things. I got a sleep apnea test. Turns out I had sleep apnea. So CPAP time. I quit drinking, and I'm almost 5 years sober. I started exercising more, although I could be doing a better job at that. But the mindfulness and meditation, not medication, meditation, I started taking seriously in 2020 and have like a daily practice and have tried to. And I'm dying to do a retreat. One of these days. Any thoughts or questions or anything?
So, it seems to me that so an underlying direction would be training the mind. I actually like the word steadiness rather than concentration. Because concentration, it feels too forced in a way. Just the word, the connotation in English.
Yeah.
But steadiness, to me, and maybe people would find their own word, it just feels softer and more settled back. So it's just settled back, steady. So that seems to me, strengthening that ability of the mind would be super helpful. So I'll just share one last thing. Periodically, just in my many years of practice, and I do a long retreat every year. Each year, different aspects of the practice are just pulling me to do it. So recently, and this was true even before the retreat, my daily practice, I thought, I want to just strengthen the steadiness, strengthen the concentration. So it was, it's infinitely better than it was when I began.
Yeah.
But it could be deeper. So it was really interesting. So just in my daily practice, I just started steadying on the breath. So the whole aim was just that. And for the first few weeks in doing that, I didn't really see much difference. It was just my usual. But I was really surprised that just from a daily practice, by committing myself to do that for a period of time, I began to notice a significant level shift in the ability to stay steady. And I was surprised. I would have thought, oh, I need to be on an intensive retreat in order to do it. But I said, no, if it's consistent daily within the capacity of who's ever doing it, over time, and it might be over some months, I think it will be noticeable, the improvement. So I think sometimes people think, oh, I can't do this. This is beyond me, right? But being consistent, and again, for shorter periods of time that will work for the person, but then doing it consistently for some period of time, and understanding what their intention is, and working with what I said, the intentionality rather than the holding on.
Yeah.
Whether it's with the breath or with the metta. For me, it would be an interesting experiment with people who are really struggling with ADHD, just to see whether that actually has a positive effect.
So what you're saying is like being consistent every day, spending 10 minutes, let's say, of sitting practice and focusing on the steadiness of one's breath, or on your breath specifically in order to become more steady, just so I'm clear.
No, steadiness on the breath. But it's one breath at a time. That's the thing. And that's what I was talking about before. Before each breath, calling up the intent, remembering the intention of stay steady for this one breath. Because that's within people's capacity. That's not long. That's like, seconds.
Yeah.
But then the next breath. So with each breath was starting again. But if you do that, for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, you will be training the mind.
Yeah.
So
I love it. Joseph, this has been such a pleasure and an honor to speak with you. And thank you so much for putting up with Zoom.
It worked out thanks to your tech skills.
Yes, I still got them. Try 10 minutes of meditation every day for 30 days at wisesquirrels.com/steady. Thanks for tuning in to Wise Squirrels. Please make sure you follow the show so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed the show, leave a review, please, and visit wisesquirrels.com/love for bonus content, audio comments that you can leave, membership information, free coaching, sponsorship details, booking information, and much more. Drop by wisesquirrels.com/love. Check out the link in the episode description below and explore now. Thanks again for listening.
Hey, this is Dr. George Sachs, co-founder of Inflow, a proud sponsor of Wise Squirrels. If you have ADHD, you know how tough it can be to stay on top of, mostly everything. That's why we created Inflow, an app designed by expert clinicians and people with ADHD to help you understand your brain, build habits that actually stick, and feel less alone in the process. Get the support you need with Inflow. Head to wisesquirrels.com/inflow to check it out.